The first thing I noticed wasn't pain. It wasn't voices. It wasn't even light. It was a smell.
Clean.
Sterile. The kind of smell that doesn't belong anywhere near a summer afternoon. It sat at the back of my throat before my eyes could even focus. And when they finally did, all I saw was a ceiling. Too white.
Too still.
Nothing like where I'd been standing just moments ago. Hours ago. I genuinely didn't know. I didn't panic. I just lay there, recalibrating. You know that feeling when you wake up in a hotel room and need a full second to remember what city you're in?
It was like that.
Except when I looked beside me, there was no chair with a jacket thrown over it. No phone charging on a nightstand that wasn't mine. No one sitting quietly nearby, waiting for me to open my eyes. Just the steady, indifferent rhythm of a monitor. And that's when I started trying to remember how I got there. It had been a regular summer barbecue. Nothing unusual about it on the surface. Laughter layering over itself, the same story being told twice because nobody was really listening the first time. My wife moved through the crowd the way she always did, adjusting her tone depending on who she was standing next to. Effortless.
Practiced.
I remember standing near the drinks table for longer than I needed to. I wasn't thirsty. I was just pausing. And then I felt it. Something shifted inside my chest. Not pain, not exactly. More like a tightening. A quiet pressure that didn't follow any pattern I recognized. I remember thinking I should probably sit down. But I didn't. And it wasn't pride that kept me standing.
It was something colder than that.
It was calculation. A quick, private assessment of whether saying something out loud would actually be taken seriously, or whether it would be softened, dismissed, turned into something lighter than it was. I already knew how that would go, so I stayed where I was. I told myself I'd step away in a minute.
Get some air. See how I felt.
And then, nothing. Not even the fall. What came back to me next was a memory. It was more like residue. Fragments of sound without any order to them. The first voice I recognized was my wife's. She wasn't panicked. She was just close. And she was saying something I will never forget for as long as I live. He does this sometimes. And then her mother's voice. Clearer than everything else.
Calm. Certain.
Like someone making a practical decision about a minor inconvenience. Don't call an ambulance. He's just seeking attention. There was no fear in her voice.
No hesitation.
That's what stayed with me most of all. It wasn't a reaction made in a moment of panic. It was decided, settled. And somewhere after that, time just dissolved. I didn't know how long I was out. I didn't know how I eventually got to that hospital bed. But when the door opened and a doctor walked in, I turned my head slowly, and he didn't look surprised to see me awake. He just checked the chart, then looked at me. "You're up," he said. Like it had been expected all along. What he told me next would completely reframe everything that had happened that afternoon. He explained it carefully. Not simplified, just structured. Something about my heart rhythm. A condition that could stay completely quiet until one day it didn't. And when it escalated, he said, it required immediate attention. Then he paused and added something almost quietly. You were brought in later than we would have liked. Not accusing, just factual. I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. He asked if I remembered what happened before I lost consciousness. I told him yes. He asked if I had been alone. And I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud felt like finalizing something. Like closing a door that had been sitting open for a very long time. No, I said. I wasn't alone. He studied me for a moment, then said something quietly, almost procedurally. We'll need to document the delay. And there it was. Something official had entered the room. Not dramatic. Not confrontational. Just recorded.
Real.
Not subject to being reshaped or reinterpreted later. I nodded.
He moved on to next steps.
Medication. Monitoring. Follow-up appointments. Words that implied there was something beyond this room still waiting for me. When he left, the silence felt different. Less empty. More defined. I reached for my phone. No missed calls. One message from my wife, timestamped 2 hours earlier. Let me know when you're awake. No question mark.
No urgency.
I stared at it longer than I should have. And then I set the phone down. What came over me in that moment wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt, exactly.
It was something more structural than that.
Like a realization I'd been loosely assembling for years had finally clicked into place. A pattern, finally complete. And then a nurse came in and asked for my emergency contact. I gave her a different name. I didn't explain it.
She didn't ask.
She just wrote it down and nodded. But that small, quiet moment felt larger than anything I could have possibly said out loud. Something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just permanently. My wife arrived near evening. She walked in carrying the same energy she'd had at the barbecue.
Composed. Contained.
Slightly adjusted by something that hadn't fit neatly into the day's schedule. "You scared everyone," she said, setting her bag down like she was slipping back into a familiar routine that I watched her. Everyone. The word didn't quite hold the weight. She meant it too. "I'm okay," I said. She nodded, relieved in a way that felt more logistical than emotional. "They said it wasn't serious." I looked at her. They were wrong. That paused her. Just slightly. I didn't elaborate. Not to be cold. Not to punish her with silence. But because somewhere between that backyard and this hospital bed, I had stopped feeling responsible for translating the weight of things into a version she could comfortably accept. She recovered quickly. "Well, you're here now." Yes, I was. And for the first time, that fact didn't feel connected to her or to any of them at all. She stayed for a while. She talked around the edges of things. The barbecue. Her mother. Plans for the coming week. Normalcy carefully reconstructed. I listened. I just didn't step in to carry it forward the way I always had before. When she left, she said she'd come back tomorrow. I didn't respond right away. Not out of defiance. Just consideration. A pause I hadn't allowed myself in a very long time. When she was gone, I looked back up at that ceiling. Still too white. Still too still. But something in me had settled. The doctor's words came back, and it wasn't the medical part that echoed. It was the implication underneath it. This had required urgency. And somewhere between the moment I hit the ground and the moment I arrived at this hospital, that urgency had been denied. Not by accident. Not by panic or confusion. By decision. I closed my eyes. Not to sleep. Just to let that understanding settle all the way in, without rushing to soften it, without looking for an explanation that would make it easier to carry. There would be conversations eventually. There would be versions of events offered, adjusted, reshaped. I already knew that, but something had moved quietly past all of that. I didn't need anyone to agree with what had happened. I didn't need it acknowledged or validated or argued over. I just needed, finally, to stop pretending it hadn't. And lying there in that too-white room, with the monitor steady beside me and a different name written on my emergency contact form, something in me, for the first time in longer than I could remember, felt still. Not broken. Not bitter. Just finally, clearly awake.